Thank you very much for that kind and gracious introduction. It's ironic that I didn't bring my guide dog today. She is doing what they call at the guide dog school, blowing her coat. As the weather gets warmer, she is now shedding in an amazing hypersonic way. Clouds of Labrador fur flying off her. And I thought, well, you know, maybe today's the day to leave her home. But I detect that you would have preferred her, perhaps to this more human or quasi-human appearance. So I wrote a little thing about UDL, but then I'll finish up reading something from the dog book. How's that? So I try to cover both things. If I magnify things really huge on this iPad, I can read with one eye for a short period of time. And so that's what I'm going to do. If you're disabled, you must explain yourself, always. You'll never get a medal for this. You'll say, I belong, I participate, I'm equal, though the phrases are gestural, utopian. You might as well say, there are mermaids inside the sun. A poem. 5 crows in a dream last night. Faces of the old. A woman older than iron came near, the skin of her face like ice to a pond. But she was speaking the language of crows. I saw it, the myth of speech. She made no sound. I'm up early, rummaging. Being disabled is a garage sale of the mind. I'm always moving things around, seeing if things have more value in different settings. The salt shaker on a windowsill feels better than when it was in the corner of a cupboard. Does this have something to do with what they call universal design? Design, from Latin designare, to mark out, point out, devise, choose, designate, appoint. Later in English, it comes to mean to form an outline or scheme. It's a hopeful word if you bleach all the history out of it. Hello. All right. Universal is so hopeful it puts Shirley Temple to shame. That's a good line. I'm going to read it again. Universal is so hopeful it puts Shirley Temple to shame. I think we can't achieve universal design unless we understand what we mean by defect. I am not a defective sighted person. My friend DJ Savarese is not a defective talking person. My pal William Peace is not a defective walking person, though he gets around with a wheelchair. Until we understand that defect or defective is as unhelpful as the mermaid inside the sun, we'll get nowhere. We will go on designing things that the majority of people cannot use. The majority of people is a wonderful phrase. Too bad it's unconnected to reality. It assumes that humans are static. Real people age, go blind, have industrial accidents, become wounded in wars, develop illnesses based on genetics, have auto accidents, dive headfirst into shallow ponds. It's a longer list than we've time for. The majority of people are not defective. They are us. It's better, I think, to say we're a planet of universal defectives. Let's call ourselves unifects. A poem then. Letter to Borges from London. Now, you may know Argentine poet George Luis Borges. He was blind, and he never went anywhere independently. He never learned how to travel independently, and he was led everywhere by sighted companions. And I wrote a whole book of poems addressed to him, though he was, of course, deceased, in which I try to outline for him what it's like to travel places solo and enjoy, therefore, the wonder and strangeness of getting lost or experiencing spontaneity in various places around the world, because you can travel independently as a blind person. So this is called Letter to Borges from London. When I was a boy, I made beehives from old letters, dark scraps from a trunk, lost loves, assurances from travelers. It was intricate work. The blind kid and the worker bee lost whole days. I made a library for inchworms. What I was really doing is I was pulling scraps of old letters out of a sea chest up in the attic and making cities out of them, right? Now, I'm a natural philosopher, but with the same restless hands. Some days I put cities together, Santiago and Carthage, Toronto and Damascus. If strangers watch closely, Borges, they'll see my fingers working at nothing. In Hyde Park, near the Albert Memorial, and alone on a bench, I reconstructed the boroughs of New York. Brooklyn was at the center, Kyoto in place of Queens. This was a city of bells and gardens, a town for immigrants. The old woman passing by saw my hands at work. She thought I was a lost blind man, a simpleton, said, "Poor dearie," and gave me a quid. Now, I hate to sound like a high school English teacher, but really, which of us is the more disabled in this poem? The blind guy thinking, or the old woman? The blind guy has design. He's imagining better cities. The old woman, who we'll say has a tender heart, believes in the 19th century social construction of disability. In her unexamined view, the disabled belong in special places, are helpless, and need charity. It's worth remembering that this 19th century view required a design to begin with. Here's some helpful prose from the National Disability Authority in Ireland. Universal design is the design and composition. I love that word, composition. Is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. An environment, or any building, product, or service in that environment, should be designed to meet the needs of all people who wish to use it. This is not a special requirement for the benefit of only a minority of the population. It is a fundamental condition of good design. If an environment is accessible, usable, convenient, and a pleasure to use, everyone benefits. By considering the diverse needs and abilities of all throughout the design process, universal design creates products, services, and environments that meet people's needs. Simply put, universal design is good design. This is excellent. The problem arises, especially in higher educational settings, when people are asked to consider the diverse needs and abilities of students. University faculty and administrators are not necessarily skilled when it comes to thinking about diverse learning styles or needs. In historical terms, the university is built on a model of exclusion, a narrow model, one which suggests quite openly that only certain bodies and minds need apply. J. Dolmage writes in his wonderful book, Academic Ableism, Disability and Higher Education, quote, "Disability has always been constructed as the inverse or opposite of higher education." Or let me put it differently, higher education has needed to create a series of versions of, in quotes, lower education to justify its work and to ground its exceptionalism. And the physical gates and steps of universities trace a long history of exclusion. Without universal design in classrooms, curriculum, teaching methods, websites, the university creates a de facto lower education system. If the blind student has to struggle to get accessible books, the wheelchair user can't sit in the front of the room, the autistic student can't use the proper accommodations for her needs, then the educational system is exclusionary. Let's be clear, there are some faculty and deans who like it this way, just as they like lots of steep steps that mark off the university as a place of climbing and advantage. Colleges and universities are the least disability-friendly places in the United States. The average airport is more accessible and engaged with design. In order to have universal design in higher ed, we must have universal education in mind when we teach. I'm a blind college teacher. There should be nothing remarkable about this. Yet my daily presence haunts the academy. At all three universities where I've held tenure, I've met obstacles to my participation in everything from meetings, classroom teaching, library research, online systems, even simple sporting events. All these basic things have been largely blocked. Bad as these stumbling blocks are, and I promise you they're lousy, what's worse is the extraordinary degree of ableism I've met over the course of my roughly 30-year teaching career. Setbacks are one thing, perhaps even to be expected, at least initially, but prejudicial behavior is worse, and I've experienced it over and over. I'm a well-known blind person. I have managed, despite these problems, to achieve senior status, that necrotic term for full professors. Yet I'm not a full professor at all. I'm essentially a steerage passenger on a luxury liner, one who has wandered into the wrong deck. This analogy should be ridiculous, but it isn't. I'm still waiting for accessible onboarding materials at Syracuse University, though I came there 8 years ago. I asked for them 4 times. Because I've never received them, I know less about SU than almost anyone. Getting accessible research materials in a timely way is grueling and often impossible, yet I'm expected to teach as much as anyone else, and also be a leader in my field. A colleague criticized me not long ago for speaking out about accessibility problems at Syracuse, saying, "You set back our reputation." In the meantime, disabled students tell me almost weekly how they're patronized by faculty and how difficult it is for them to get the help they need to succeed. What do? I complain. All too often, my reward for speaking behind the curtain to multiple administrators about access problems is that I'm essentially conceived of as a malcontent. The eye rolling says it all. I should go back to steerage immediately. My non-disabled, in quotes, faculty colleagues are not generally reliable allies. Even the ones who theorize disability and confront the social and economic history of disablement are seldom on the front lines when it comes to speaking up. Can't get into the famous basketball arena with your service dog? That's too bad. We're all going to the game tonight. A famous scholar once wrote about the spoiled identity the disabled are forced to endure. Have been forced to endure every day. The word for this is stigma, and everyone who hails from a historically marginalized background knows what it feels like. There's a moue of unhappiness at the sight of you. Many sighted people think the blind don't know it when it comes, but we do. Lately, blind students have been filing civil rights complaints against colleges nationwide. I have not done this because I keep thinking my persistence and whatever in me passes for eloquence will pay off. But you see, there's the problem. I want a broad coalition of faculty and administrators to speak up. In order for this to happen, we must educate faculty about inclusive education as a human right and underscore the central place of universal design in that expectation. Why is the rhetoric of diversity and inclusion at universities invariably so wooden and dead? One would rather succumb to the prolixity of self-help manuals. Give me Leo Buscaglia over prose exhorting the building of individual competencies, or better, let's imagine collective talent and free students and staff of the corporatized idée fixe of the happy individual. If we're to be honest, we should admit universities are competitive and structurally opposed to whatever is meant by inclusion. I like Paulo Freire's sense of it, grassroots, promoting literacy for all, but on the American campus, the term seems to mean tag along, as if we're all going for a nice walk, and you've been invited. Lucky you. Lucky you, indeed. It's estimated that almost 3/4 of disabled college students fail to graduate. What was it? The food? Must have been the chow. Yes, inclusion stops at the classroom door, stops at the inaccessible website, stops when the disability services people posit there are just a few hoops you have to jump through to get accommodations, and you better follow the procedures exactly, or your semester will go down the drain faster than your costume jewelry. Structurally speaking, disability is to inclusion as mice are to kitchens. At most universities and colleges, disability isn't included under the rubric of diversity. As a former administrator once said in my presence, we don't want people to know we have learning disabled students. It will affect our rankings. Talk about typhoid Mary. Disability might be catching. But back to the rhetoric, consider the following: a fairly typical letter which a prospective college student must give to a physician in order to receive accommodations on campus. This is just lifted at random from the internet. Please provide the following information under separate cover and on practice letterhead. The authorized release of I'm going to read this like Walter Cronkite. The authorized release of information is to include but not be limited to the following. 1. Presenting diagnosis ease utilizing diagnostic categorization or classification of the ICD or DSM-4. Diagnoses should indicate primary, secondary, etc., and significant findings, particularly in respect to presenting problems. 2. I know this is painful. 2. Date the examination, assessment, evaluation was performed for the presenting diagnosis, or if following the student for an extended time, date of onset and date of an evaluation of the condition that is recent enough to demonstrate the student's current level of functioning. 3. Tests, methodology used to determine disability. Please, that's in capitals, do not send copies of the student's medical records. 4. Identify the current functional impact on the student's physical, perceptual, and cognitive performance in activities such as mobility, self-care, note-taking, laboratory assignment, testing, examinations, housing conditions. Is this condition temporary? If temporary, what is the expected length of time to recovery? 5. Describe any treatments, medications, assistive devices, services the student is currently using. Note their effectiveness and any side effects that may impact the student's physical, perceptual, or cognitive performance. 6. Recommendations for accommodations. Explain the relationship between the student's functional limitations and the recommendations. 7. Credentials, certification, licensure, and/or training of the diagnosing professionals. This information is kept confidential, excepting as required by law. Again, the prose above is standard boilerplate. It's what's for breakfast if you have a disability and want to go to college, and you'll need to be medicalized and sanitized. This is what passes for accommodation language at matriculation for most disabled university students. Get a doctor or a psychologist to affirm you are indeed disabled. Moreover, ask a medical professional to articulate for you what you will need in order to succeed in higher education. The falsity of the claim that a standard MD or PhD knows much about disability and its circumstances is nearly laughable, but not quite. Inclusion is in the balance. Let's see your disability certificate, kid. Let's see what it says we have to do for you. Do you feel included? What's that? Not quite? Perhaps you have a bad attitude. A campus that's inclusive is accommodating because its classrooms, its digital domains, its syllabi, its assignments, its library are all beyond compliance, which in turn means no one should need a letter from a doctor or a specialized office with its reliance on treatments and functional impacts and cognitive performance and the like. This language, by its very nature, is not inclusive, nor is it meant to be. It's designed to weed out students who might be tempted to fake a disability because, Lord knows, maybe extra time when taking a test will give certain underachievers an advantage. I know of no other area of diversity where one's provenance and authenticity must be vetted and confirmed. Back to universal design. Thank God we're getting back to universal design. Again, from the Irish National Disability Authority. I love these people. So universal design is the design and composition of an environment so that it may be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest possible extent. May be used in the most independent and natural manner possible, in the widest range of situations, without the need for adaptation, modification, assistive devices, or specialized solutions by any persons of any age or size, or having any particular physical, sensory, mental health, or intellectual ability and disability, and means, in relation to electronic systems, any electronics-based process of creating products, services, or systems so that they may be used by any person. Universal design, this is still the Irish. Universal design should incorporate a two-level approach. One, user-aware design, pushing the boundaries of mainstream products, services, and environments to include as many people as possible. Customizable design is designed to minimize the difficulties of adaptation to particular users. So, viewing universal design at the micro level, a single design feature or a simple product designed so that it can be used by as many people as possible. At this level, the designer is not expected to find one design solution that accommodates the needs of 100% of the population, as universal design is not one size fits all. Rather, designers are urged to explore design solutions that are more inclusive, those designs that push the boundaries as far out as possible without compromising the integrity or quality of the product. If more than one option is available for a design feature, choose the more inclusive feature. For example, when installing a handle on a door, it is always better to opt for a lever than a doorknob, as the lever handle can be opened using the elbow or a closed fist, benefiting people carrying shopping bags, as well as people with limited strength in their hands. Viewing universal design at the macro level, at this level, the designer has the opportunity to combine accessible and usable design features with customizable or adaptable features alongside more specialized design solutions that deal with the most extreme usability issues. By stepping back from the individual features and looking at the product, service, or environment as a whole, designers are in a position to investigate alternatives, providing equivalent experiences to users. This is what you guys are all paying attention to here, right? Examples include a user-friendly website that meets web accessibility initiatives, right? Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 has a customizable user interface and is compatible with assistive technologies. From micro to macro, universal design has implications for the design of any single feature of a product, service, or environment, as well as the design of that product, service, or environment as a whole. The 7 principles of universal design were developed in 1997 by a working group of architects, product designers, engineers, and environmental design researchers led by the late Ronald Mace in the North Carolina State University. The purpose of the principles is to guide the design of environments, products, and communications. According to the Center for Universal Design at North Carolina State, the principles may be applied to evaluate existing designs, guide the design process, and educate both designers and consumers about the characteristics of more usable products and environments. Principle 1, equitable use. Anybody can use it. It. I'm hard-pressed to see how a distinguished visiting speaker using a wheelchair would be where I am now. It, right? Equitable use. 2, flexibility in use. 3, simple and intuitive use. 4, I like this one, perceptible information. 5, tolerance for error. 6, low physical effort. 7, size and space for approach and use. The issue of inclusion for people with disabilities in higher ed is a matter of culture. Far too many colleges and universities fail to imagine that people with disabilities represent a cultural movement. Let's leave aside for the moment the powerful statistical urgencies represented by the finding that nearly 10% of matriculating freshmen are self-identifying as having a disability. A cultural understanding of disability means, at its very core, that students or staff with disabilities are our children, our sisters, daughters, sons, fathers, and mothers, our veterans, our colleagues. But it means more than that. An academic or curricular awareness of disability means that our nation's institutions of higher learning will finally sense that what they do for all, and with no oppositional and expensive and demeaning hand-wringing. Such a position requires that disability services and academic culture, matters of curricular planning and cultural diversity, be wedded as they should be. So that's my little speech on UDL from a disability end user and contrarian activist perspective. There's a very famous book about disability by James Charlton with the great title, Nothing About Us Without Us, which is, of course, one of the rallying cries of the disability rights movement. Nothing about us without us. When you're designing things, when you're planning things, involve the disabled. Don't think of them as an after effect or people you go to later. Involve them from the get-go, right? Make them part of, ooh, this is good. This reminds me of that Saturday Night Live skit about Sean Spicer. Remember that? Spicy, going down the Fifth Avenue. I like it. So, I hope this is a little bit helpful. I can't see any of you, so I don't know if you're all making mue's of disgust and you're looking horrified at your watches. I really think that the push to universal design and inclusive learning models is important, not merely to create spaces where disabled folks can thrive, but it's also about turning the university toward a fully democratic engagement with learners, a thing that universities have been very, very slow and often reluctant to embrace. So I'm excited by the prospects. I think what's happening here is really at the vanguard of human rights and democratic rights movement in education. I'm just back from a 10-day trip to Kazakhstan, where I brought a world-class jazz musician, a famous poet, and a great dancer, and we did workshops for disabled kids with non-disabled kids, doing jazz workshops, poetry, dance, and we put together a 60s style happening with poetry and jazz and dance, disabled and non-disabled together. This is in a country where the disabled are still hidden and where they're not allowed to go to public school. So when you change the dynamics of the environment to full inclusivity, and you make it, I think the word in here, there was a word there, pleasurable. At one point I said, it should be pleasurable, right? Inclusion should be, as they used to say in the 60s, it should be a gas. It should be fantastic. That's what it's really all about. Should I stop for a minute and take a couple of questions, or should I read a little creative writing? You guys have to tell me what to do. Or I can do my Marty Feldman impersonation. Read? Read a little creative writing? Okay. See how easy that was? That wasn't too hard. Let's go here. So since the dog book was so lovingly referenced, let me read a little bit from Have Dog Will Travel here. Hang on. So I think that human rights are not identity-based, which is to say, while identity is important and liberatory politics start with a sense of one's own circumstances, I believe that when you have embraced your difference, you have also embraced the differences of others, and you create the possibility for rich and dynamic engagement with people who are not like yourself. So shortly after getting my first guide dog, Corky, a big yellow lab, and she's the subject of the book, Have Dog Will Travel. The book is a love poem to this dog who got me out of my very introverted and painful sense of blindness as a despoiling and difficult thing, and helped me into the world, into the light, really. Got me to experience spontaneity and the joy of just going places on a whim. Shortly after getting her, I broke all the guide dog school rules immediately. I took Corky and went to New York City just for fun. When you get a guide dog, you're supposed to stay home for a month. Just walk around your neighborhood. And I said, the hell with that. Immediately went to Manhattan. Because she was trained in Manhattan. I said, look, let's go to Manhattan, right? I'd never been to New York alone doing stuff that I just wanted to do. I'm 40 years old. I'm having a Mary Tyler Moore, you're going to make it after all moment in New York. So, I'm just going all over New York. And so here's a little section about what happens when I encounter a security guard who doesn't want me to come into a Manhattan electronics store with the guide dog. And I realized that the very presence of the guide dog in my life is helping me grow. The folk singer Greg Brown has a song with the lines, "You come to me with too much laughter, and I teach you how to smile." The song felt true. I didn't want to be so enthusiastic about guide dog life that I'd pretend by word or deed service dogs are a panacea. In rhetoric, there's a term, proleptic, which means the anticipation of possible objections in order to answer them in advance. See, I think disabled people have to live with that thing a lot, right? Living with a guide dog necessitates both knowing and rehearsing how you'll respond to various types of opposition. You're called upon to imagine the bad moments when your difference will be the focus of public attention. My first true experience of this, or the first time I had to put it in action, was in Manhattan. I walked into a large computer store on 6th Avenue. I wanted to purchase a laptop. As we pushed through the door, a security guard put his hand on my chest. Come in. No dog," he said. I pressed forward and the guard stepped back. "Stop," he shouted, and waved his arms. Customers stared. My civil rights and the security guard's dignity were equally delicate. I didn't know where the guard came from, but his accent sounded West African. How could he possibly know anything about guide dogs? The store's manager hadn't given him information. All he knew was no dogs allowed, and there I was with a big-assed dog. As we stood in the doorway, I figured it would be my job to foster dignity for both of us. They hadn't taught me this at the guide dog school. They'd given me a booklet with access laws, a useful thing. I had the right to go anywhere, but no one had mentioned emotional intelligence or how to engage in public mediation. I made Corky sit. Listen, I said softly, get the manager. This will be okay. This is a special dog for the blind. I wanted to turn our misunderstanding into something respectful. This is one of my favorite passages in the book. It doesn't stand out, but it's really, I'll tell you why in a second. The manager was one of those guys you see all the time in big city stores. Sadder than his customers, red-faced and put upon. He had a scoured toughness. He approached me and began shouting at the guard, "It's a seeing eye dog, for God's sake, let him in, sorry." My fight or flee rush was subsiding. I wanted all three of us to experience kindness. I was in a Manhattan electronics store and dignity was in peril. It would have been easy to say, fuck it, and look out for myself alone. I'd gotten into the store, I was angry, I could have pitched a fit, but I didn't feel like doing that. The guard's name was Ekwueme. My name was Stephen. The manager's name was Phil. Listen, I said, dogs for the blind are not common. You don't see them every day. This is Corky. She's very smart. I let my voice become soft. Ekwueme and Phil both petted Corky. A customer approached, said, "I've raised puppies for the guide dog school. Best dogs in the world." Here's the part I'm proud of. Phil seemed suddenly pleased, as if he too was philanthropic, or could be someday. Ekwueme admitted he liked dogs. Outside with the computer under my arm, I reckoned life with Corky was more complex than just a story of freedom. Ekwueme and Phil would become legion in my travels, but I didn't know it yet. What I did know was reflected in a quote I'd always liked from Martin Luther King, Jr. An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. I sensed that having a service dog meant something more than honoring my own rights. Take the first step in faith, said Dr. King. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. So that's a little passage about Manhattan. I'll read one more little section. How am I doing on time?
Great.
I got like 5 more minutes? More? Now you're in trouble. All right, here we go. So here I am going around New York for the first time alone with the dog. In Macy's, I made the mistake of talking to a mannequin. Every blind person has done this. A woman said, "That man won't be talking," and laughed and walked with me to the men's department. Bonding, which is with the dog, meant I couldn't be embarrassed. It felt as if some essential part of my self-regard had been fired in a kiln. "Thank you, Corky," I said. "Thank you, girl." I was a little bit like Charlie Chaplin, easy, loose, mistake-prone, and strong. Small things. She walked me around a sidewalk elevator, its doors revealing steep stairs. New York, the city of ominous basements. She stopped at a curb, then backed up. A double-decker tourist bus was drifting, scraping street signs, the people up top laughing. The bus was like a boat filled with drunks. Good girl. We walked past odd little shops, their doors open, releasing Victorian odors of commerce. New York is a city of smells, many unidentifiable, the scent of earth from one door, fragrance of plums from another. On 6th Avenue, a woman ran out of a shop and grabbed my arm. "You must taste," she said. "Taste?" I said. "Yeah, you taste." She dragged us into a Chinese bakery and offered us a Chinese cocktail bun filled with coconut. Corky and I rewarded her with a little dance. New York. Everyone feels vaguely as if he or she is in a circus. What can you do? You chew, dance, and walk. You thank strangers who suddenly appear. Do they appreciate your soul? Do they have pity for you? You don't know. I felt there had to be a better word than bonding. I was living the chaos of joy, something one can't talk about with ease, largely because there's no vocabulary for the thing. You're in love with your surroundings, loving a barefoot mind, wild to go any place. Sometimes crossing Fifth Avenue felt like traveling to the top of Mount Olympus. The hot dog vendor on the corner was Zeus, I could tell. We bought a bag of wild cherries from a fruit stand, stood beside a fountain, touched the hair on skinny trees. George Eliot wrote, "We long for an affection altogether ignorant of our faults." Heaven has accorded this to us in the uncritical canine attachment. By day 2 in Manhattan, I saw George Eliot was incorrect. Corky wasn't ignorant of my faults at all. Working through the tangled places, she surmised my confusions. Stopping before a flight of subway steps, she looked up at my face, wanting to be certain I'd found my location and that my footing was secure. And the caresses of the subway dark, a softness like twilight under the city. The anteroom of hell with its stink of burnt rubber and urine and the collected odor of 10 million human fears. And we were forging ahead through the damasked air, and I don't know how to convey it, but the rhythms of the trains and our own courage were tightly bound. Who the hell is happy in the subway? I swear we were. Our session in New York underscored both our safety and happiness. Now and then, we had to stop someplace, just so I could hug her. We found a bench outside of FAO Schwartz, the famous toy store, and I took her harness off and scratched her chest. And then she flopped over, demanding a belly rub. And wouldn't you know it, 2 children from Germany, a boy and girl about 10 years old, accompanied by their mother, they wanted to help give Corky a belly rub. We had a spontaneous belly rub clutch. Then more people came, a dozen, people unbeknownst to each other, drawn by softness and animal faith in the heart of a great city. Animal faith was philosopher George Santayana's term for instinctive belief, belief without rational foundation. I'd begun using the term for my own purposes. Walking with Corky was opening the hours for me. I was feeling a foundational confidence and openness I'd never known. Perhaps this wasn't rational, but maybe it was. Animals keep us alive to perceptions we've long given up on. I'd always kind of imagined this was true. Now I was experiencing it. Our belly rub clutch was a little impromptu church ceremony. Afternoon sunlight was reflected by tall windows. Children and adults were laughing. Corky had all 4 feet in the air and a wizened dog smile. Our last trial day in the city had to involve a long walk in Central Park. We entered somewhere around 72nd Street at 5th Avenue and made our way to the boat pond. I walked with my eyes closed. I'd always suffered from migraines, and Corky's skill allowed me to rest my eyes, give up on the desperation of residual sight. It was a late April day, and the scent of new grass was on the wind. And from a distance, we heard boaters laughing on the water. Someone had a portable radio playing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I felt a lovely tempered joy among trees. I remember Joseph Campbell once saying, "You must have a room or a certain hour of the day or so where you do not know who your friends are. You don't know what you owe anybody or what they owe you, but a place where you can simply experience and bring forth what you are and what you might be." For us, that place was now anywhere. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions, but please don't raise your hands. I mean, that won't work. Blurt.
Hello, Steve. This is William. I've got a little portable thing I'll use here, and really I just want to give you my thanks for a moment. I want to thank you for coming here today and sharing your lived experience with us. I want to thank you for the physical, mental, and emotional labor that you have put forth today to really ground us, I think, in the sense of my third thank you. It's so important, I feel, that as we go forth these next 3 days, that we take a very deep dive and critical look at the experience of people with disabilities in our world, right, to best understand why we are here for these 3 days and how important this work really is.
That's so good, and thank you for that, William. And I would say it's really important to, I know you all know this, but I'll just say it anyway. It's really important to remember that the disabled are all of us, right? That's one of the hangovers of the 19th century, right?
We'll put the disabled in the asylum over here, where they won't be seen.
But the truth is, they really are your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, the veteran next door, your neighbor, And once we start thinking of it that way, we no longer think about the individual asking for an accommodation and disrupting the system, which is the way so much still happens, right? That long, terrible quote I read from a standard boilerplate, how to get an accommodation at the University of North Carolina. See, I'm outing them now. That's pretty standard stuff, right? It's all of us. We don't treat all of us this way.
We have another question or comment.
Okay, hi. My name is Rebecca Dady, and I am a professor of American Sign Language here, and I am the chairperson of the World Languages Department. I also happen to be deaf. So I want to extend great thanks to you for your presentation today, your stories, your experiences, and your experience as faculty with a disability, also teaching students with disabilities, being their mentorship and their support. I 100% understand and share your feelings of frustration being deaf faculty here and also being department chair.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, you know, going through all of these barriers daily, weekly, monthly, for years, how do you recharge? How do you recharge your batteries? How do you encourage students who are feeling burnt out to recharge their own batteries? Because I have a lot of students who come to see me regularly venting, saying that they're tired, they're frustrated, they want to give up. What advice do you give to those students?
So that first of all, thank you for your sharing that you too navigate in this steep academic space with a disability and have experienced these kinds of obstacles yourself. And the question of how to recharge is really essential, and it's a big one. And I think I have 3 answers to that, but I'm really thinking of this publicly for the first time, so who knows? I may modify this later. But I have 3 answers to how to recharge. And I want to contextualize this for students with disabilities as well, or any student experiencing extraordinary stress. I mean, let's be clear, if you're a first-generation college student from a family with limited means, and you're struggling also with a job on the side, or 2 jobs on the side, and you're competing for grades and a place at the table, then you're working with a lot of stress. If you're a blind student and you can't get access to the materials in a timely way, and you have a professor who suddenly says, well, if you're having these kinds of problems, you shouldn't be in my class, right? That's a kind of stress. But I think all the stresses are related. In a way, they have to do with the kind of outworn notion of the college or university as a place of, it's a place for getting information in a road race. And so stopping the road race is kind of an important element of not letting the stress overcome you. And I don't mean, you know, you stop the road race, you don't do your work, you don't show up prepared to teach a class, or you don't turn in that paper for Professor X. But I mean giving yourself critical time out for that 20-minute power nap, that walk around the pond, an opportunity to just go to the library for 20 minutes and listen to Bach or Bob Marley. Moments of refreshment are often denied to those of us who hail from historically marginalized places and seek to be a part of colleges and universities. There's this sense that we have to work harder, and we do often have to work harder. There's this sense that we have to be always on point, and that there's no moment of slow satisfaction and detachment to recharge. It turns out, my wife is good at this. She's not disabled, but she gets tired while driving. She pulls over and naps for 20 minutes. It always works, right? So there's no reason we can't do that too. So that this is a kind of a micro accommodation, right? It's part of the accommodation process to just step aside and take some critical moments out, to just breathe, relax, chill. The second thing is that in terms of refreshment, I just have gotten to the point in my life and career where I refuse to let the obstacles define me. I just can't do that anymore. I used to beseech people for my accommodations. You know, can you please have this? I just really, please, I was like Tiny Tim, you know. And now, you know, I know what I need, and I don't take, you know, a lot of talk back about it. And it's amazing how liberating that becomes. That's a kind of refreshment too. What is it Popeye always says? I am what I am. You know, I mean, I know better about me than anybody else, and I'm just simply gonna, you know, be me. And then the third thing, this is the biggest, is to actually get away from the college or university at least once a week. My wife and I rescued 2 horses, and we keep them about 40 miles north of Syracuse, and I go see the horses and feed them and spend a whole day with horses. And I don't know how to explain it, but you know, the guide dog helps too. I love my guide dog. But being away from the incredibly enforced and stressful dynamic of the daily grind, this is good for everyone, right? And I find that really helps me. The bigger issue is how to not give up, right? And I don't know. I don't know how to not, what is it about staying true to what you want? I guess it's, in a way, it's about intentionality. If you like knowledge and you want to use it for good, then you don't give up. Yeah, you'll understand that I don't know that I answered the question. I mean, it's a philosophical question, isn't it? How do you help disabled students who feel really dispirited keep in the game? And, that's a very heavy question. A woman once asked me, why go anywhere if you can't see? And I guess my answer is finally that the attainment of knowledge is power that will give you modes of surprise and wonder that you can't yet conceive of.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments?
Great. Well, thanks, you guys.